Hello everyone, welcome to Get Snoozy, where you relax, you listen, you sleep. Today, we bring you a collection of stories that will tear open the wounds stitched beneath our smiles. Hannah was 30, a history teacher in Willow Creek, Ohio, a sleepy town where cornfields stretched beyond Main Street's single stoplight. Her classroom smelled of old books and eraser shavings, its walls lined with maps and timelines she'd pinned up with care. Teaching was her refuge, a way to make sense of a life that had settled into routine. She'd grown up here, stayed after college, and now lived in a small house with a sagging porch, her evenings spent grading papers or sipping tea alone. Love had come once. A college boyfriend who'd fizzled out, leaving her cautious, her heart tucked safely away. Leo changed that without trying. At 18, he was her student, a senior with dark curls, a shy grin, and eyes that held more weight than his years. He wasn't like the others, who doodled or dozed through her lectures. He'd stay after class, asking about the Civil War or Roosevelt, his questions veering into deeper things, dreams, fears, what made history matter. She'd answer, her voice steady, but his attention stirred something in her, a spark she hadn't felt in years. Their talks grew longer, filling the quiet hours after school. He'd lean against a desk, fidgeting with a pencil, and share bits of his life. A dad who drank too much, a mom who'd left, a hope to study engineering and build something lasting. Hannah listened, her guard softening, and found herself sharing too, her love for old records, the time she'd wanted to be an archaeologist. He saw her not just as Miss Carter, but as Hannah, and that scared her as much as it warmed her. She was his teacher, 12 years older, bound by rules and ethics. But feelings crept in. Uninvited, she'd catch herself smiling when he walked in, her pulse quickening at his laugh. He'd linger by the chalkboard, erasing stray marks to stay longer, and she'd let him, the air between them heavy with things unsaid. The note was the first time he'd crossed into words, and it shook her. You make me want to be better. It was innocent, maybe, but to her, it felt like a confession, mirroring the one she'd buried deep. Hannah wrestled with it. She'd lie awake, the note hidden in her desk drawer, her mind replaying his voice, his gaze. She could shut it down, send him to the counselor, keep her distance, but she didn't, not yet. She told herself it was kindness, helping a kid who needed it, but her heart whispered something else. Spring stretched on, graduation looming, and she felt time slipping away, a chance she couldn't name but couldn't ignore. Graduation came, a warm June evening under a tent on the school lawn. Hannah stood among the faculty, her clap steady as Leo crossed the stage, his cap tilted, his grin wide. She tucked his note away, never answered it, but her eyes lingered on him, memorizing the moment. He'd leave for college soon, Ohio State, he told her, a scholarship for engineering, and she'd stay here, her life unchanged. The thought stung, sharper than she'd expected. That night, she found another note slipped under her classroom door, his handwriting unmistakable. "Thank you for everything, Miss Carter. I'll never forget you." Her breath caught, tears pricking as she read it, the weight of never sinking in. He was gone, not just from her class, but from her world, a door closing before she'd even knocked. She drove home, the note crumpled in her pocket, and sat on her porch, staring at the stars, her heart a tangle of relief and regret. Summer passed, then years. Hannah kept teaching, her chalkboard filling and erasing, but Leo's absence lingered, a quiet ache she didn't name. She heard snippets. He'd graduated college, landed a job in Cleveland, and tried to be happy for him, but part of her wondered what might have been. She dated once or twice, men her age who talked of sports or stocks, but they didn't see her, not like he had. The note stayed in her drawer, yellowing but untouched, a secret she carried alone. 5 years later, on a crisp fall afternoon, Hannah was locking her classroom when a shadow fell across the doorway. She turned, and there he was, Leo, taller now, his curls cropped, his eyes still bright but steadier. He was 23, no longer her student, just a man in a jacket, holding a coffee cup and a nervous smile. "Miss Carter," he said, then corrected himself. "Hannah, I was in town. Thought I'd say hi." Her heart lurched, old feelings rushing back, but so did the old fears. He wasn't a kid anymore, but she was still older, still cautious. Yet his presence felt like a second chance, a crack in the wall she'd built. They walked to a diner, the one with the neon sign flickering on Main Street, and talked about his job designing bridges, her new unit on the Underground Railroad, the years between. He'd thought of her, he admitted, his voice low, and she felt the air shift, heavy with possibility. Hannah didn't leap, not at first. She'd spent too long guarding her heart, and Leo's return stirred doubts as much as hope. But he kept coming back, driving down from Cleveland on weekends, bringing her coffee or a book he'd found. They'd sit in her classroom, the chalkboard blank, and talk until the janitor shooed them out. He wasn't the boy who'd left notes anymore. He was a man, grounded, with dreams he was chasing and a warmth that hadn't faded. She let him in slowly. They'd walk the town's river path, leaves crunching underfoot, her hand brushing his until he caught it, his grip steady. She told him about the notes, how they'd scared her, how she'd cared too much to act. He listened, his eyes soft, and said he'd felt it too, a pull he hadn't understood until he'd grown up. There was no rush, no pressure, just a quiet unfolding, like pages turning to a chapter they'd both waited for. The age gap worried her. Friends raised eyebrows. Her principal frowned, but Leo didn't care. "It's just numbers," he'd say, his grin disarming, and she started to believe him. They built something real, piece by piece. Dinners at her house, trips to Cleveland, his sketches of bridges pinned next to her maps. He saw her still, and she saw him, not as a student, but as a partner, equal in ways that mattered. A year later, they stood in her classroom, now his too, in a way, and he pulled out a ring, a simple band, nothing flashy. "I'm better because of you," he said, echoing his note from years ago, and Hannah laughed, tears falling as she nodded yes. They married in the town square, her students tossing confetti, the chalkboard behind them scrawled with "Congrats, Miss Carter," in messy letters. Their life wasn't perfect. His long hours, her stubborn streak, but it was theirs. They'd sit on her porch, his arm around her, the Ohio stars above, and she'd feel it. A love that had waited, grown, and found its time. The notes stayed in her drawer, not a secret anymore, but a reminder of how close they'd come to missing this. Hannah erased her chalkboard each day, but Leo's place in her heart was permanent, a story they'd written together, line by careful line. Before moving to the next story, don't forget to subscribe and comment down where you're listening from. Owen was a carpenter, 40 years old, with calloused hands and a quiet way about him that suited the small town of Missoula, Montana. His workshop sat on the edge of town, a weathered barn filled with the smell of sawdust and linseed oil, where he built tables and bookshelves for folks who liked things made to last. He lived above it in a one-room loft, his life pared down to coffee in the morning, work through the day, and a beer on the porch at night, the Bitterroot Mountains looming dark against the sky. He wasn't always so alone. Growing up in Missoula, he'd had friends, a high school sweetheart who'd moved away, but life had a way of narrowing things down. His parents were gone, his dad to a heart attack, his mom to cancer, and he'd learned to keep his own company, finding comfort in the rhythm of hammer and saw. He didn't mind it, not really, but there was a hollow spot inside him, a place that wanted more than wood and nails. Then Josie walked into his life, bright and sudden as a summer storm. It was at the farmer's market downtown, where Owen sold cutting boards under a canvas tent. She was 28, a barista with a quick laugh and hair that caught the sunlight, buying a board for her apartment. "This one's got character," she'd said, tracing the grain with her finger, and her smile hit him like a spark. They got to talking about the market, the mountains, the way coffee tasted better at dawn, and he felt something shift, like a door creaking open. They started meeting up, easy at first. She'd stop by the workshop with coffee, her apron still dusted with flour, and sit on a stool while he worked, her chatter filling the quiet. She'd talk about her dreams, moving to a big city, maybe Seattle, to open her own cafe, and he'd listen, nodding as he planed a board, picturing her in that life. He told her about his building a house one day, something solid with a porch for sunsets, and she'd tease him, calling him an old soul, but her eyes were soft when she said it. Their time together grew into something deeper. They'd hike the trails around Rattlesnake Creek, her hand slipping into his, or share beers at the local dive, her laugh louder than the jukebox. He loved how she saw the world, full of possibility, alive with color, while he was steady, grounded, like the trees he worked with. He started building her a chair, a surprise, sketching it out at night when she wasn't there. It was simple, with clean lines and a daisy carved on the back, her favorite flower, because he wanted her to have something of him, something that'd last. But Josie had a restlessness he couldn't match. She'd get quiet sometimes, staring at the horizon, her fingers twisting the hem of her shirt. "Missoula's sweet," she'd say, "but it's so small, you know." He'd nod, his stomach tightening, because he knew what she meant. She wanted more, something bigger than this town, bigger than him. He'd lie awake after she left, the chair taking shape under his hands, hoping it'd be enough to keep her close. He didn't ask her to stay, not outright. He'd show her the chair's progress, shyly pointing out the daisy, and she'd smile, kiss his cheek, but her eyes were far away. They'd cook dinner in his loft, spaghetti, nothing fancy, and she'd talk about Seattle, Portland, places buzzing with life, and he'd feel her slipping like sand through his fingers. He loved her, though he hadn't said it, and he thought maybe she loved him too, in her way, but it wasn't the kind of love that stayed still. One Saturday, Josie didn't show up. They'd planned to hit the market together, her idea, to pick out pumpkins for his porch, but her phone went to voicemail and her apartment was silent when he knocked. Owen waited, his gut churning, telling himself she was busy, maybe overslept. But by Monday, her co-worker at the coffee shop spilled the truth. Josie had packed a bag, caught a bus to Seattle, left a note saying she needed to chase her dreams. No goodbye, no warning, just gone. Owen stood in his workshop, the chair half finished on the bench, its legs still rough, the daisy only sketched in pencil. Her name stuck in his throat, a bruise he couldn't touch. He'd known she was restless, but he'd hoped, foolishly he saw now, that she'd choose him, choose this life. The market, the trails, the way she'd lean against him under the stars. It wasn't enough. He wasn't enough. He tried to move on, kept sanding, hammering, filling orders for clients. But the chair sat there, a ghost in the corner, and he couldn't let it go. He'd work on it late at night, whispering to it like she was still there, telling her about his day, his dreams, the way he'd wanted her to stay. The daisy took shape, its petals sharp under his knife, and he poured everything into it, every laugh they'd shared, every quiet moment, knowing she'd never see it. Weeks turned to months, and word trickled back through mutual friends. Josie was in Seattle, working at a trendy cafe, her Instagram full of city lights and new faces. She was happy, they said, thriving in a way Missoula couldn't hold. Owen scrolled through her posts once, his chest tight, and saw her smile, brighter, freer without him. He closed his phone, picked up his sandpaper, and kept working on the chair, its wood smooth now, its lines perfect, as if finishing it could hold on to her a little longer. The chair was done by winter, gleaming under the workshop's bare bulb, the daisy carved so fine it looked alive. Owen ran his hand over it, feeling every curve, every knot, and knew it was the best thing he'd ever made. But it was empty, No Josie to sit in it, no laughter to fill the room. He set it by the window where it caught the morning light and left it there, a quiet monument to what he'd lost. He didn't hate her, not really. She'd needed to go, to find her place, and he couldn't fault her for that. But the hurt stayed, a dull ache that woke him at night, his mind replaying her voice, her touch. He'd loved her alone in the end, and that was the hardest part, knowing she'd moved on while he was still here, sanding her name into wood that'd never hold her. Spring came, and Owen made a choice. He carried the chair outside, set it on his porch with a free sign, and watched as a young couple took it, smiling like it was a treasure. He didn't tell them its story, didn't say it was built for a woman who'd left. He just nodded, his throat tight, and went back inside. The workshop felt lighter, emptier, but not in a bad way, like he'd let a piece of his heart go, trusting it'd find a new home. Years passed, and Owen kept building tables, shelves, a life that was his own. He'd hear about Josie now and then, a cafe she'd opened, a life she'd made, and he'd smile, a little sad, a little proud. One day, flipping through a magazine at the barber shop, he saw her picture, older now, laughing in a Seattle storefront, her dreams alive. He set the magazine down, his hands steady, and walked home under the Montana sky. The porch was bare now, no chair to haunt it, but he sat there anyway, a beer in hand, the mountains dark and quiet. He'd loved her, and she'd gone, and that was okay. Not easy, but okay. The daisy was hers, wherever she was, and he'd carved it with everything he had. Some loves don't stay, he'd learned, but they shape you like wood under a blade, leaving something stronger behind. Owen tipped his bottle to the stars, a silent toast to Josie, and let her go, his heart a little lighter, his work still calling him home. Before moving to the next story, don't forget to subscribe and comment down where you're listening from. Cal was 50, a ferry captain who'd spent half his life on the waters of Puget Sound, Washington, shuttling folks between Seattle and the islands. His boat, the Salish Star, was a creaky thing, green paint peeling, seats worn smooth, but he knew every bolt, every hum of its engine. He lived in a small cabin on Bainbridge Island, just him and a stack of dog-eared thrillers, the kind of place where the wind carried salt and cedar through the windows. His days were steady, sunrise runs, passenger chatter, the slap of waves against the hull. It was enough, or so he'd told himself, since Ellen, his wife, died 10 years back. Ellen had been his anchor, bright, quick to laugh, with a knack for gardening that turned their yard into a jungle. Cancer took her fast, leaving Cal adrift, his heart locked tight. He'd tried dating once, a setup by a deckhand's wife, but it felt wrong, like betraying her memory. So he stuck to the ferry, the water, the rhythm of coming and going. Folks called him gruff, his beard graying, his answers short, but they trusted him to get them home safe, and that was what mattered. Then he saw Nora. She was in her late 30s, maybe, with short hair tucked under a knit cap and a backpack slung over one shoulder. She'd show up on the dock some mornings, sketching the Salish star or the gulls circling above, her hands moving fast, smudging charcoal as she worked. He'd watch from the helm, pretending to check the gauges, drawn to the way she focused, like the world faded except her paper and pencil. She rode his ferry sometimes, sitting by the rail, her eyes on the horizon, and he'd catch himself staring, wondering what she saw in the gray waves. One day, she stayed late, sketching as the last passengers shuffled off. Cal found his feet moving before his brain caught up, carrying him down to the dock. "You draw my boat a lot," he said, his voice rougher than he meant. She looked up, startled, then smiled, a small, warm thing that cracked his defenses. "It's got stories," she said, holding up a sketch of the star, its lines soft but sure. They talked, awkward at first, about the ferry, the weather, her art, and he felt something loosen, a knot he'd carried too long. Their meetings became a rhythm. She'd ride the early run, sketching the sound, and he'd save her a seat near the wheelhouse, where the wind wasn't so sharp. Her name was Nora, he learned, an artist who'd moved to Seattle after leaving a bad marriage, one that had clipped her wings for years. She'd talk about her old life in Spokane, control, silence, a husband who didn't listen, and how drawing had saved her, given her a voice. He'd share bits of his, Ellen's laugh, the garden gone wild, the way the sea kept him sane. They'd lean on the rail, coffee cups steaming, and swap stories as the islands slid by, their words building a bridge between their hurts. It wasn't love at first, not the wild kind. It was slower, steadier, like the tide coming in. He'd notice her scarf catching the breeze, or the way her laugh crinkled her eyes, and his chest would warm, a feeling he'd thought was gone for good. She'd linger after the run, her sketches piling up, his boat, his hands, the way he squinted at the horizon, and he'd feel seen, not just as the captain, but as Cal, a man with a heart still beating. They didn't rush it, didn't name it, but it was there, growing in the quiet moments, a promise neither had to speak. One spring evening, as the sky burned orange, a storm rolled in fast, the kind that turned the sound into a beast. Cal was set to make the last run, Bainbridge to Seattle, when Nora boarded, her sketchbook tucked under her coat. "Bad night for drawing," he teased, but her smile was tight, her hands fidgety. The ferry shoved off, waves slamming the hull, and halfway across, the engine coughed, then died, leaving them stranded in the churning dark. Panic rippled through the passengers, but Cal stayed calm, his voice steady over the intercom. "Stay seated, life vests on, help's coming." Nora found him in the wheelhouse, rain-soaked, her eyes wide but trusting. "You got this?" she said, and he nodded, his hands working the radio, calling for a tow. The storm raged, rocking the boat, and for hours they waited, Cal barking orders to the crew, Nora passing out blankets, her presence a quiet strength beside him. When the tow arrived, dragging them to shore, the passengers cheered, but Cal felt the weight of it, his boat broken, his control slipping. Nora stayed as the dock cleared, her coat dripping, and they sat on a bench, the storm easing into drizzle. "I was scared," she admitted, her voice low, "but you weren't." He shook his head, confessing he'd been terrified, not of the storm, but of losing her, of failing her, like he'd failed Ellen, or so he'd always feared. She touched his hand, her fingers cold but firm, and said, "You didn't fail tonight." The moment shifted everything. He saw her, not just the artist, but a woman who'd faced her own storms and chosen to stay. She saw him, a man who'd carried loss, but still steered true. The ferry was towed for repairs, leaving Cal grounded, and Nora didn't leave his side. They spent the night in a diner, talking until dawn, their fears spilling out, her of being trapped again, him of loving and losing. By morning, they knew this was real, worth fighting for, a chance neither would let slip. The Salish Star was out of service for weeks, but Cal and Nora didn't drift apart. They'd meet at his cabin, her sketches taping up beside his thrillers, or walk the island's rocky shore, her hand fitting easy in his. She showed him her art, canvases of waves and boats, his face hidden in the lines, and he built her a easel, sturdy cedar, his way of saying he believed in her. They talked about Ellen, about Nora's ex, laying their pasts bare, and found the hurt didn't sting so much when shared. Love grew like the sound itself, deep, steady, alive. Cal wasn't young, wasn't smooth, but he'd bring her coffee, fix her leaky sink, and listen when she needed it. Nora wasn't soft or simple, but she'd laugh at his bad jokes, draw him in quiet moments, and pull him into dances on the cabin's creaky floor. They didn't need grand gestures, just each other, the ferry, the water that carried them both. A year later, they married on the Salish Star, fixed up and running again. The deck was strung with lights, passengers clapping as Nora walked to him in a simple dress, her sketchbook traded for a bouquet. "I promise to stay," she said, her vow clear over the waves, and Cal choked up, promising to hold her close, always. Her drawings lined the wheelhouse, his boat, his hands, their story, and he hung one above their bed, a reminder of where they'd started. They built a life on the island, her art in galleries, his ferry run steady, their cabin full of laughter and salt air. They'd ride the sound together, her sketching by the rail, him steering with a grin, the horizon wide and theirs. Storms came, as storms do, but they faced them side by side, their love a promise kept, strong as the boat that brought them home. Cal would catch her eye sometimes, her cap tugged low, and feel it, the luck of finding her, the joy of holding on. Nora would smile back, her hand on his, and know she'd found her safe harbor, right where the water met the sky. The stories may come to an end, but the thunder and rain will linger a little longer, keeping you company in the quiet of the night. Sleep well, and good night.